Vroom vroom. Hey everyone, I'm here in the 2001 Jaguar XKR that I bought about a month ago for my wife. We've put about 1,000 miles on it now. I've always loved these cars, and I thought I'd do a little bit of a review because I think that they tend to be really underappreciated and undervalued, and definitely one of the best values if you're looking for a grand touring car or an upper luxury car of this sort. So my first car was a 1982 Jaguar XJS V12, and that was really the predecessor to the XK8 and XKR that came out in the late 90s. And in fact, if you look around this car, there's a lot of similarities. Suspension-wise, the rear suspension looks very similar. They just made some much-needed updates to it to make it more serviceable. But even the center console and the transmission tunnel cover, all of that is very similar to what came out of the XJS. And if you look at the evolution of the XJS into the XK8 and XKR, really, yeah, the XJS in the mid-90s, the Aston Martin DB7 came out, and that was essentially, you could say, the prototype for the XK8. The body was very similar, and it used a lot of Jaguar components. But if you put a DB7 next to an XK8, the bodies are similar, but in my opinion, the XK8 looks great, much better than the DB7. When this car came out in the late 90s, I was in high school, and I always thought that these things were beautiful, and it was on my list of cars that I would always want to have. Now, that list has evolved over the years, and there's a lot of cars that have come and gone from that list, but this is one that's always stayed. Part of it for me is because I love grand touring cars, which is what this is. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a grand touring car, its basic characteristics are that it's a two-door, typically a 2+2, so you've got two rear seats, even though the rear seats aren't very usable. An ample but not large trunk, so you can have, basically you can take your wife can take you can go someplace for a weekend, you can take it on a road trip. It's a fabulous car with good power that can handle highway driving, whether you're on the Autobahn going fast or just a normal highway or around town. But where the grand touring car really shines is on long highway trips. And this is a great car for that. It's extremely comfortable. It handles speed very well. In fact, out of the cars that we have, this is by far the one that I would most want to take on a road trip if I was going to go somewhere. Just because it's so comfortable and it's such a pleasure to drive. It's beautiful when you walk up to it. The lines of the hood looking out from it are beautiful. The dashboard is elegantly laid out. And everything just feels really nice. If you think about the Jaguar take on luxury, it's grace, pace, space. So the idea is that you have a car that is very elegant, it's very nice to look at, it's very comfortable, everything is nice to touch. It's not just about something that's super soft like a Cadillac, or if you drive a Mercedes or a BMW likes to call themselves the ultimate driving machine. With them, it's a whole lot more. There's definitely more of a performance aspect or a performance bias to it. And with Jaguar, it's sort of a nice blend that I personally feel no other car manufacturer has. Everything on this car is really soft and really light, but in a purposeful and good way. So if you just think about the steering is very light, but it's not over-assisted like an old Cadillac with pinky steer, where you could actually turn the steering wheel, and if you turn it hard enough, the momentum from the steering wheel would keep it turning for a little while. This is light, but it still has a great steering feel to it. And even the J-gate shifter that a lot of people don't like, but I always thought was neat, it has a nice light shift between the gears, but there's still positive detents, so you still know when you've selected a particular gear. The leather is very soft. It's not like German leather that you find on a Mercedes that's extremely thick and it's thick, hard, rigid. This is very soft and supple leather, and so the whole experience with the car is it's luxury, it's performance, but it's sort of a blend. It's a car that you can take to the racetrack, but is really best suited for long drives. So, a couple more things I'll say about the car. The dashboard is very nicely laid out. There's a lot of wood accents, and it's real wood, not fake wood like what you see on a lot of cars. I don't like automatic transmissions. This automatic is a Mercedes 5-speed. In fact, the same that was used in the E55 that I used to have. But in this car, it works well. It shifts smoothly. It has very nice gear ratios, so the shifts are very positive, and you go through the gears. You spend enough time in a gear to actually get a nice pull. It's not like one of these modern 7 or 10-speed transmissions where it's shifting all the time and you're never spending any time in one gear. With this, you can get on it and you actually get to enjoy hearing the engine accelerate, although sort of. I'll get to that a little bit more in a minute. So here's a good example. There you go. So that's just a nice little pull. It's not too loud. It's not too loud. You actually mostly hear the supercharger, but it's a good volume and it's enjoyable. So value. This is a 2001. It had when we bought it 59,000 miles on it, which when I was working on these cars when they were new, we usually saw ones anywhere from 75 to 100,000 miles coming in the shop. So this is very low mileage. It was very well cared for, always garaged, in immaculate condition, and we only paid $9,000 for it. By comparison, when I bought my E55, that was $9,000 and it had 190,000 miles on it. Now that was a few years ago, and things have gotten a little bit, obviously they've depreciated a bit more, and there's some age factor in there, but you would never find an E55 for close to what this cost. And especially if you wanted to look at something like an SL500 or SL600 or SL55, something like that, that really would have been the equivalent of this car in its day, you're not going to find one of those for this kind of a price. Jaguars have always been undervalued in my opinion, largely because people tend to think that they're very unreliable. And okay, I'll give a little bit of credit with that. I wouldn't say that this is going to be as reliable as a Mercedes or BMW counterpart, but it's not going to be a whole lot different. All of these cars are upper luxury vehicles. They have a lot of bells and whistles on them, and they're going to have more issues just because they have more parts. There's a lot of computers in these things. But with that said, when I was working on these, they were really pretty reliable. Couple of known points. Jaguar was calling these transmissions sealed for life when they were new, and that's really not smart. You should change the transmission fluid every 30 to 60,000 miles, depends on who you talk to. But what we found was every 100,000 miles the transmissions would go out if you didn't change the fluid. Another weird weak point on these cars is the cup holders. It actually has cup holders, but they're built into the lid for the center console down here that you can't see, and they're very weak. When I was working on these cars when they were new, they were pretty much always broken. It was very rare to find one that actually worked properly. This one works, and so I'm trying not to use it. The engine. Let's talk about the engine a bit. This is actually the one area that I'm really going to ding the car on, and it's not because it's not a nice, smooth power plant. It is. It's a very smooth engine. You can barely tell that it's running at idle, and it was modern for the time. It's a dual overhead cam, 4-valve per cylinder V8 with a supercharger on it. But if you think about how Jaguar had been making engines for about the 50 years prior to this car coming out, they were basically all either inline 6s or V12s. And if you're somebody that really cares about engines, which I am, the inline 6 and the V12 are just naturally balanced engines, and they make a better sound. They they have a better feel to them. This engine is very dampened, and I think a large part of the reason why they damped this engine so much more than what you found on previous models, is because of the fact that it's a cross-plane V8, and it just naturally doesn't have the same level of smoothness that the other engines got. So what I would have liked is for Jaguar to have built this car either with an upgraded version of the supercharged inline six that was in the DB7, or the XJR from the mid '90s, or alternately if they'd done a revamp of the V12. By the time this car came out, the V12 was actually pretty old, and had been out since the '70s. It was a very big, heavy engine, but I think that they could have gone and done a revamp. Instead of this 4-liter V8, make a 5-liter V12 that was modern for the time, and gotten a much more interesting power plant. I think that would have really set this apart. Now, politically, there were probably reasons why that couldn't happen, because there was the Aston Martin V12 Vantage that Ford was working on, and so they probably didn't want to have another V12 that would be viewed as potentially a competitor and take away from sales. But the inline six would have, in my opinion, been a better choice. In fact, this is one car where I would say the engine is great, but unlike other Jaguars where I used to get annoyed if people would put V8 engines in them, because that was a common thing to do with the straight six, or the V12 would blow up and people would put in an LT1 or an LS1 if they really... Usually it was just a normal 350 in those days, but the LT1s were getting popular. This car actually, I think, would benefit from an LS swap, as much as it pains me to say. Just because there's really nothing special. There's really nothing about this engine that makes me feel like it's sophisticated or exquisite like with other Jaguar engines. It's just a power plant, and in fact, because it's so muffled, all you hear is the supercharger when you get on it. And I like a nice gear whine. I like a nice whine from a supercharger, but I also want that to be paired with an engine sound. And so in this case, all you have is the supercharger whine without the engine sound. But with all that said, this car is definitely an improvement over the XJS, and in fact, right now they're a better value. If you look at an XJS, and I was thinking about buying another one. I'd own 6 of them, so 7th seemed like it'd be appropriate. But you can actually get one of these a lot cheaper than an equivalent XJS. Like I said, I paid $9,000 for this car. If you were going to buy a 60,000 mile V12 XJS from the mid-90s, first off, good luck finding one, because they're a lot rarer. But even if you did find one, then you probably would be spending more in the $15,000 to $20,000 range at least. So these cars have hit an age. Okay, here, I'm going to just get on it for a second. So you can see what I meant there about the gears, that you got a nice long pull, and you can hear the engine a little bit, I guess, but the supercharger is definitely what you hear more than anything else. Whereas with the older ones, you very much heard the engine, and it wasn't that it was loud, but it sounded good and it sounded correct. So not so much with this car. But these cars are at an age now where they're not yet getting to that point of being classics or collectibles. They're just old, and this is the best time to enjoy cars like these financially, because they've depreciated a tremendous amount. They haven't gotten to the point where they've started to appreciate, and you can find some of these low mile examples for really reasonable prices. So if you're going to buy one of these, what would I look for, and what would I avoid? I definitely would go for as few miles as possible. Jaguars don't wear like iron in the same way that Mercedes do, and because of that, I would say under 100,000 miles definitely. Under 75,000 miles would be preferred. if you can find one that has 60,000 miles or less like this one, definitely go for it. When you look at one of these, find out if the transmission fluid's been changed, and if so, when. Because if not, that's something to consider. These transmissions are easy to change fluid on, but they're very expensive if they break. So you want one that's been serviced. The rear end, the rear axle probably also hasn't had the fluid changed on it because those were considered to be sealed for life. I've got another video up where I changed the fluid in the rear axle, and it was definitely original and definitely needed to get changed. In fact, the most prominent noise when I'm just driving this car down the road is from the rear axle, the rear differential. And it's hard to say whether or not that is, it probably does have something to do with the fact that the fluid was never changed. Now, it's not loud enough to indicate that there's a problem or something that I should be concerned with, but it does make some noise. I would also avoid trying to buy one of these that was made in the 97 to 99 range. In 2000, they made some improvements to the timing chain and the water pump. And then in 2003 or 4, I forget which, they made a few more improvements. So it would also be good to find out if the timing chains and water pump had anything done to them, or if they were original or not. I've had a few people suggest that I change those out proactively on this car since they're original. I'm not going to mess with it. We drive this car pretty much locally. We don't go on long trips with it very often, and even if we did, I wouldn't be concerned about it. Maybe I'll change the water pump when there's a reason to, but the timing chains, even timing chain tensioners were having problems, and those usually didn't go out until around 100,000 miles. I'm not going to mess with that now. So water pump, maybe. Timing chains, definitely not. Fluids, absolutely. I've already changed the transmission and differential fluids. I'm going to do another change on the transmission fluid to get all of it out. So if you're in the market for a grand touring car, or you're just looking for a really nice, enjoyable luxury car, give the XK8 XKRs a look. They're fun to drive. The acceleration, by modern standards, it's not fantastic, but it's still in the sub 6 second range, around 5.5 or so, and that's plenty ample. I would actually say that compared to my E55, the driving experience on this is much nicer, even though it's slower. And the biggest reason for that is just because of that Jaguar philosophy of having a car that is comfortable and while also being graceful, and just the Jaguar take on luxury. With the E55, it was faster, but it wasn't. It was actually just sort of at that point where it's hard to describe. The engine delivered the power nicely, but it was enough that you could still use it on a public road and enjoy it, but there's just something that I'm at a loss for words for how to describe it, but the quality of the power delivery in this car is nicer. So this is actually the second time I'm recording the video, because the first time around the audio just didn't work at all. So hopefully this time it's worked better and I can upload it. If you're seeing it, then obviously you have. It's Giving Tuesday right now that I'm recording this, and if the audio is good, I'm going to upload it in another day or two. And so, if you wouldn't mind, I would appreciate it if you check out the nonprofit organization that I founded and that I'm president of. It's Cloud9 Rescue Flights. I'll put a link in the description. And we transport animals from high-kill parts of the country to places where they would find homes. We're trying to do a fundraiser to raise money for our fixed expenses for next year. And if you're an animal lover and you'd like to help us out, I'd sure appreciate it. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and if you buy one of these, enjoy it.